Thank you, Alan, for that great introduction. So before we get started with the debate, I'm just going to go over a couple of the quick ground rules and what the format's going to look like. So again, we've already talked about debaters. There. So before we get started with the UBI debate, we're just going to quickly define what the UBI is so everyone can get a better understanding of what today's debate topic is about. The UBI, as defined by the Basic Income Earth Network, or BN, is basically basic income is a periodic cash payment unconditionally delivered to all on an individual basis without means test or work requirement. In essence, what this means is that nobody would have to apply for getting a UBI. It'd basically be that everyone who wants a $1,000 a month stipend, according to Yang's plan, would be able to get it. Now, that's in the wrong place. So, really quickly, this is what our debate format is going to look like. For those of you who do debate, this is a bit of a modified Oxford debate style with some political forum, POFO elements mixed in, or public forum, sorry. So my introduction is going to take around 3 minutes. Preliminary voting is going to take an additional 3 minutes. Opening.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'll try to get this really quick. a lot of content to go over. All right. So we affirm the resolution that a national universal basic income, like the one championed by 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang, would serve as an effective way to tackle poverty in the United States. UBI is an unconditional monthly transfer of cash from the government to its citizens, regardless of income. The money received has no strings attached. You can use it to help pay for rent, go out to a restaurant, pay for childcare, anything. While this idea may sound too good to be true, I challenge you to further understand its direct and indirect benefits. It gives individuals, and not the government, the power to decide how to best spend money to suit their own needs. When compared to traditional means-tested programs, it removes the disincentive to work, where as soon as your income reaches a certain point, your benefits are dramatically reduced or eliminated. It reduces the administrative costs, where the government doesn't have to track who's making what, and as a side effect, removes any incentive to abuse the system. It also recognizes people who do valuable work every day, yet don't technically contribute to the GDP. Think of stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home dads, volunteers. Think of underpaid teachers and social workers. At a macro level, a UBI would permanently increase the GDP by $2.5 trillion and increase the labor force by 4.6 million people. It would create a trickle-up economy, giving everyone a more equal footing and opportunity, all the while not causing inflation because it can be implemented using existing funds in circulation. The 2017 Finland experiment showed it significantly improved mental health, and the 1974 Canadian Mincome experiment showed an 8.5% reduction in the hospitalization rates for its participants, and it led to no meaningful decrease in work. And finally, if we want to get technical about the stated resolution, a UBI is by definition the most direct way to reduce poverty. If the current poverty line is $12K a year, then giving everyone $12K a year instantly moves everyone at or above this line. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we'll be having our first con speaker.
Hello, my name is Peter Kuo. I am against having this UBI system. It sounds great, actually. Who wouldn't want to have $1,000 a month extra, right? But when we got to remember history, when communism took over China 70 years ago, they promised one thing: free land. And I'm afraid this same concept of $1,000 a month is a baby step towards total socialism, towards America. It would never work here in America. It's very expensive. And, I'm a Chinese person. I grew up knowing one thing my parents had taught me. In fact, our ancestor, Lao Tzu, had taught us these words, 赤子千金不如交子一亿, meaning that giving 1,000 ounces of gold to your son is worse than teaching him how to fish, so to speak. And in Western world, it's saying that it's better to teach him how to fish than give him fish every day. So it's my humble opinion. This is not the American way, and it would never work. Thank you.
We'll be having our next pro speaker, the second and final speaker.
Hello? Okay. So the first pro speaker defined UBI and showed why it's an effective way to address poverty, even in a vacuum. So UBI is already a winning method there. But we also don't live in a vacuum. We live in a society undergoing the greatest socioeconomic transformation in our lifetime, the fourth industrial revolution, which is powered by automation and artificial intelligence. McKinsey estimated that 1 in 3 jobs will be obsolete by 2030, and this includes not only the most common jobs that the average American has, such as truck driving, but also white-collar work, such as radiology, law, and accounting. So anything routine is at risk for automation. And so as we look forward, UBI would provide a smoother transition for society. I also wanted to point out that this economic dimension is not the only one that UBI is best suited to address. So for example, because of the nature of UBI, which makes it very popular ideologically speaking, it has broad bipartisan appeal, you could argue from a socially conservative perspective, right, that UBI would help reduce the amount of abortions. Because according to the Guttmacher Institute, of the 850,000 abortions that happen in the US every year, about 70% happen because the mother cannot afford a child right now. And 3/4 of the women who get an abortion are either poor or low income. So by alleviating that financial strain as an incentive for abortions, UBI could, in effect, be the biggest pro-life policy that's ever been implemented. So that was an example of the way to frame UBI as a socially conservative appeal. But you can also take a step back into the more economic dimensions. We can see that on the conservative economic field, you see Milton Friedman arguing for a sibling version of UBI. You see 1,000 economists arguing for it in the 1970s. I think that UBI would be effective because it has bipartisan appeal.
We'll be having our final con speaker.
Well, thank you. I want to begin by thanking GAPA for sponsoring this event and all of you for staying till past 4 o'clock. But to me, this debate is more than just about UBI. It's really about the role of government. As our world changes, we need to ask ourselves a question. Do we want our government to focus more on protecting ourselves from this change through UBI, or do we want a government that focuses more on recognizing that each of us are unique individuals and protecting our individual freedom? I think we all know instinctively that nothing is really free. If the government gives you something free, whether it's income or some service, they must by definition compel or force somebody else to provide it, usually in the form of taxes. UBI, in my opinion, would represent an encroachment on some of our freedoms because it takes away some of our ability to decide for ourselves what is a basic income, as well as how we want to spend or invest or give away our own money. Now, automation is nothing new. When Henry Ford rolled out cars on the factory assembly line, he no doubt put workers who made horse-drawn carriages out of work. Human beings have always been relentless in innovating and making new technologies that improve the lives of everyone. But every time this has happened, this has improved the lives of many and has created a lot more jobs than it has destroyed. Now, yes, there are many people who are left behind by automation, but the answer is not to give a one-size-fits-all, mail the same check to everyone. How many of us really believe that someone like Donald Trump, Bill Gates, or LeBron James really needs or deserves UBI? Let's instead focus on helping those who have been left behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll be moving on into our 16-minute period of inter-panel discussion and cross-X. So either side can begin asking questions as soon as the timer starts. Please do not talk over each other.
So my question to Kenji, if that's okay to start, is how do you intend to enforce this UBI system? Would anybody qualify, just like universal health care for all, regardless of immigration status? Or how do you intend to implement it?
So I guess its name is universal, so everyone. One plan, the one proposed by Andrew Yang, is like all U.S. citizens over the age of 18.
People with green cards, people here on H-1B visa too, or no?
If they're not citizens, no.
It has to be U.S. citizens.
Yeah, U.S. citizens over the age of 18 until death. This is
But he agrees to give you universal health care to illegal aliens in the first debate.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. Maybe particularly,
So that's okay?
Particularly the UBI though, it's like, I mean, that's his plan, like citizens 18 and over. Yeah.
Citizens 18 and over. Okay.
Yes.
So you're going to enforce that by looking at
Sure.
the paper passports.
It's also an opt-in system, so like you have to opt into it to receive it. If you're a rich guy, you're Bill Gates, you don't want the $1,000 a month, you don't have to get it. But it's definitely an opt-in.
Legal alien, I can opt in.
No, if you're not a citizen, then you can't get it. Yeah.
Okay. But I can get free healthcare.
To be honest, I'm not as familiar with the gang's position on that, on like illegal aliens.
It is for all.
Healthcare, but that's fine.
Yeah.
But,
He did it for all.
Okay. Actually, can I respond on
course.
something you said earlier? Is you kind of equated this UBI to like socialism in China. Like my understanding of socialism is it's like the government controls the means of production. I think it's kind of a top-down approach to decide like what gets made, where it gets distributed. Whereas like UBI is very much operating in this a free market economy as well. It's still capitalism, right? Nothing is changing there. We're still in a free market society, except for the fact that everyone has this additional $12,000 per year. So, but they're still operating the free market economy. You're still free to go buy whatever you want. Nothing is being like decided for you from the top down.
Right, it's a capitalism that doesn't start at zero. So if you play the game Monopoly, right, every time you go around the board, you collect $200. So in this case, you would collect a certain amount of money per month.
So I could give this money to my kids, or if I get robbed of this $1,000 a month, what happens? Cash.
So you are free to do with the money whatever you want. You can save it for yourself. You can save it for your kids. If you get robbed, you can report that as a crime.
And you get robbed now, and I don't see what that has to do with the UBI, I guess.
My point for that is really, Venezuela, again, for example, they marched towards socialism. It started by giving away universal health care. Pretty soon they give away free education. Again, those free is similar to cash, right? I mean, it's a cash equivalent of something. And because of that, they rent out other people's money. And that's the point I was trying to make.
I think a good way to think about it is that it's not free. It's what we're owed as citizens of the richest country in the world. So right now, Amazon, Facebook, these large tech companies pay zero in federal taxes because they are able to route their money through places like Ireland and declare profits overseas and say, oh, we don't have to pay federal taxes. So you and I are already paying more taxes than these giant tech companies. So with the UBI, that's the transfer part of the idea, but we also have to fund it, right? Well, the funding of it is going to come from taxes that will be levied against these giant corporations and give it back to people like us who are owed it, because we give these companies our data, they make the money off of our data. It's time for them to actually pay it back into our society.
To ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. I've heard the number $1,000 a month heard the most often. So I'll just go with that. So why $1,000, or if you don't agree with 1,000, what number do you think it should be? And going forward, who gets to decide what is a universal basic income?
Yeah, so I think the number $1,000 per month was very specifically decided because it's just below the poverty line. I think it's like 12.5 thousand a year is the poverty line in this country. And so it's just enough to like kind of act as a buffer, but not so much that's like you can live like a high hog life off of. There's still like, it's pretty difficult to live off of 12,000 a year. So that's where that number came from. And going on in the future, like I think it makes sense to tie that to the poverty rate, however that's decided.
Well, I think we all know there's something called inflation, but ongoing, who would decide how to raise it? Is it Congress? Is it executive order? Is it government agency? Because surely we're going to probably have inflation, right?
Yeah, so speaking to Andrew Yang specifically, he said he would tie the UBI to inflation, some sort of inflation index, like the consumer, it's like a CPI index. But in terms of who would enact it, certainly is not executive order, right? Congress has the power of the purse. It would have to pass through with bipartisan appeal. And we're arguing, right, that it's not actually going to be that hard to get that bipartisan appeal, especially because a state like Alaska already has a sort of fund like this. You know, they've had it since 1976. It's called the Alaska Permanent Fund. They fund it via oil. So the argument is that the U.S. can fund this for all of its citizens using money from technology.
Just one more follow-up. Is there a number that you think is too high? 10,000, 100,000, 1 million?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a limit to it because the purpose of it being a basic income is the basic part, right? Because if you start giving people $2,000, $3,000 a month, you know, you would see more people not wanting to work, right? Because it would be more possible to not work. But the purpose of the basic income is to provide a floor. It's not to completely disincentivize people from work.
Yeah, I'd like to give more context to why UBI is so appropriate now. It's like, would you guys agree that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer? Like the wealth inequality is a growing problem in this country?
Yeah, I mean, inequality is becoming more exacerbating. We especially see that here in Silicon Valley. That's why I'm actually against any plan that would be universal in the sense that it would also give these handouts to the millionaires and the billionaires who profited the most from automation and technology. There are people who have been left behind, and many through no fault of their own. I'm not going to pretend I have the answer to know how to lift them up, but I think whatever resources we spend, it should be just focused on them and not just just treating everybody the same and giving the income to everybody.
So yeah, I guess the benefit of the universality would kind of outweigh the potential waste of potentially giving it to the 1%, because stats like 74% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, 60% can't afford an unexpected $500 expense. So it's not just for those in poverty, but those just above the poverty threshold. Like a large section of the middle class basically have no wealth, and they have stagnated wages since the 70s. It's a problem that's increasing in scope, and I don't see any other viable solution other than some kind of UBI.
And then to answer the millionaires and billionaires getting it as well, I think we also need to remember that they're going to be getting the transfer of the universal basic income, but they're also going to pay a lot more into the system now with this conjunction, right? So what's happening right now is Jeff Bezos can own most of his wealth in Amazon stock. He's never going to sell that stock. We're never going to be able to get taxation from him. But if you implement UBI with a funding mechanism like value-added tax, which all industrialized nations except us have, if you did value-added tax, then every time Jeff Bezos funnels money from his Amazon company into his new company, Blue Origin, which he's using to explore space, every time he buys a new rocket ship, he has to pay tax. So that's how you actually get money out of the billionaires and multimillionaires who aren't going to sell their stock in their companies now to actually pay into the system. They're going to be paying a lot more than $1,000 a month into the system, and we can give them the universal basic income just to remind them that they're a U.S. citizen too.
Again, I feel that the concept of UBI again sounds great. Again, I will be the first one to say, give me $1,000 a month, right? I can buy insurance with it or whatever. However, I really think that people in general, I'm a financial planner. I tell people they don't plan to fail. They just simply fail to plan, right? So I think the planning stage of, again, teaching people how to fish, how to save money, can solve that problem. You say people don't have saving. I don't understand what UBI is trying to solve in terms of, it's not trying to solve poverty, right? Because we do have a welfare system that's very well in place. If you are insured, we have insurance for you. All those things, it's already in place. I feel that we may have a flat tire, but we don't total the car just so that we can fix that flat tire, right? So I feel strongly that instead of universally, thinking $1,000 is going to solve all this problem that we have, it's not. It really is not. And it's very expensive. Money got to come from somewhere. You got to increase taxes to pay for that. I'm sure you can agree with that. For me, it's really enforcement. How do you enforce that law to make sure that They don't transfer money. They don't buy drugs with it. They don't do illegal activities. So those are the things that I don't know how you're going to enforce with cash.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is, you can do whatever you want with the cash. Cash is king. But like past studies have shown that like people don't tend to abuse this money. Like you give them money, but they don't, like studies that give directly a nonprofit is done in Kenya show that like the vast majority of people use it to become more entrepreneurial. That they build up their farms. Like also right now there's a UBI study going on in Stockton, right? The mayor is implementing. It's like a $500 a month study, and I saw an article the other day where what are people spending money on? This is the basic necessities like utilities, car repairs, food. They're not spending it on drugs. Like maybe a small minority could. That's up to them.
Again, I just hope they put into study how many people are going to move to Stockton, register an address there, so that they can get this $500. They can put that into calculation. I don't know. Right?
Yeah. So I think that's why it has to be. Why Yang is running for president, because he wants to enact it on the national level. It's not state by state. It's like the entire country, and keep it at 12K. Not like more expensive in California, less expensive elsewhere. To kind of like let the market play out and see where people want to move. But it definitely helps to have it across all states like university.
Yeah, we also want to make a point about the our social welfare programs for people who are poor. A lot of the times they are ineffective, and it depends on the state, right? You can look at different stats because each state manages their own budget as regards to these cash-like programs like TANF or SNAP. But the statistics show that somewhere between 15 to 25% of people in poverty don't even receive a single penny of welfare because it takes too much time to go through the hurdle of filing paperwork, getting interviewed by the caseworkers for that money. And the stigma, too, of applying for welfare is on people's minds. So that's one reason why the universality of a universal basic income makes it so much easier. You just get $1,000 a month. You don't have to go through, stand in line and prove to the caseworker that you're only making this amount of much money. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. You just deserve the $1,000 a month.
So, quick interruption, sorry. We have 3 minutes left in the panel.
And to add to that, it definitely removes that the concept of a welfare cliff, where as soon as you get incomes above a certain amount, it gets gone. So you're kind of incentivized. A logical person would actually kind of not want to work because you work more, my total income remains the same or goes down potentially even. With UBI, it's like on top of your earned income. So it's also proportionally very large if you have low wages like. Okay, I get $1,000 a month plus my minimum income job. That's a huge jump in income. Whereas if you're in welfare, it could get reduced. I also want to ask.
I assume it's tax-free, right?
Yeah, the UBI is tax-free. No one asked or said earlier about this happened before. Like technology is changing things, and yes, that's true. I guess what I would like to say, would like to contest, is the rate of change in technology is definitely accelerating. The amount of disruption it's doing is definitely accelerating to the point where I think it's very difficult for people to transition. If everyone's kind of living piecemeal, it's how do you as self-driving trucks roll out in the next decade, how are these truck drivers going to kind of transition into this new economy?
See, well, that's probably how we differ is that, we say truck drivers, but every person is unique, and how do you know there isn't a truck driver out there who can't reinvent him or herself and start a business? Roy Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, he was a struggling salesman all his life before he founded McDonald's well into his 50s, right? But yes, there will be individuals whose lives will be disrupted and are being disrupted by technology. The question is, do we as a government or as a country respond to this by giving everybody an equal size handout? I would argue that $1,000, whatever amount you want to give, will not turn a truck driver into a computer programmer. $1,000 in most parts of the country will not support a basic standard of living, especially here in the Bay Area. So what will happen is, if you do enact UBI, every election time, the candidates will promise to raise UBI. It will keep increasing to the point where you put more stress on our national debt, and you will start to erode the incentive and the motivation to work. as Peter said, who doesn't want an extra $1,000? I personally could use an extra $1,000 a month to go to nice restaurants or go on vacations. But if it's coming from my fellow taxpayers, people in this room, I think it could probably be better spent on, like somebody who lost their job or doesn't have health insurance.
So I think one thing to keep in mind too is that if every person gets $1,000 a month, then the community you live in too has a sudden influx of a huge amount of capital every month, and that will change the entire landscape of that community. So even if $1,000 a month isn't enough for you as an individual to change, like a truck driver right now maybe on average makes $60,000 a year, right? They're not going to be satisfied with $12,000 a year for sure, but because they live in a community now where that whole community gets an influx of, let's say, like $100 million a month, and that changes that community. You'll see different small businesses start opening up, and maybe that ex-truck driver can work within their community doing other sorts of work. And other sorts of work would bloom then within that small community. So I think that makes it different, right, when thinking about it from just a purely individualistic way. And then in terms of the government funding too.
Sorry, the time is up.
Oh, time
Can
is
you just
up.
finish the sentence really quick?
Okay. No, that's okay. I'll just end it there.
Thank you. So now we'll have 18 minutes for audience questions. If there are any members of the audience that have questions to any of our sides, whether it's pro or con, you can come up here. You'll have a microphone. You get to ask your question. Please have your question prepared when you come up so we can get through this pretty quickly. So if there are any questions, you can make your way up to the stage now.
So full disclosure, I'm actually pretty gang myself. But my biggest concern with the universal basic income is definitely how we pay for it. The tax foundation said basically $1,000 a month can't be paid with just the 10% value added tax. They put us at like a $1.5 trillion deficit per year. And my question is essentially like, if one year there's not enough revenue that's raised from the value added tax, what would happen? Does that mean that like our benefit of $1,000 a month would get cut? Or does that mean that we just run a deficit that year? Or like, what exactly would happen?
Pro side will get 1 minute to respond, and then the con side.
So I think that is very true. The value-added tax is not enough just to pay for it, but there's other sources of funding, right? So there's some reduction in the back end side of expenses. So if you can prevent, say, like hospitalizations, right, and save a lot more money that way every month, and that'll go back into the system. You would also stimulate economic growth. By, on a conservative estimate, right, 500 billion a year. People have estimated up to 1.2 trillion a year with $1,000 a month UBI.
And I had the same concern myself. I mean, like the estimates are the whole thing would cost $2.8 trillion. It's a lot of money. So I wanted to know the details of where this money coming from. And I suggest everyone in this audience check out freedom-dividend.com. It's the most granular, detailed source of funds to pay for the UBI. But yeah, like Willie said, it's a lot of it's from that tax, but then efficiency gains from potentially replacing some of the other social services, new tax revenue from an increased economy.
Con side, would you guys like 1 minute to respond?
Okay. So if I understand the question correctly, is how would we pay for it if the government doesn't have revenue? But I don't think it's a secret that our government, for many years now, both parties have been spending a lot more money than has been taking in. It's called a national deficit, which is about $1 trillion a year. The national debt is $22 trillion, I believe. The UBI has been called a freedom dividend, but if any of you are stock market investors, you know that a dividend is what a company pays out of its profits. If you think of the United States as a company, we're definitely not profitable right now. And I don't want to get too fancy on finance or economic theory, but the government could theoretically print out more money, but then that makes your dollar worth a lot less. You can buy a lot less with it at the store. So yeah, that's just another reason why UBI is not such a good idea, is that it's not really a dividend. It's something we can't afford, and it's entitlement, and it's something only future politicians will try to keep increasing.
Thank you, debaters. We'll have our next audience question.
Okay, I had actually a two-part question. First of all, this isn't being defined as socialism, but it really is socialism. This would be equivalent to what Greece was doing. And as you might recall, Greece was having major problems, is having major problems, going bankrupt and such, because they've been distributing money to their citizens, and so people aren't working. And so they are having major problems, and I could foresee that this causing similar sort of issues. But the other question that I had, so I wanted you to comment on that. The other question that I had was regarding businesses. It sounded like this would be funded by businesses, and right now businesses pay based on profit. What this would mean is that businesses would have to be paying out of their coffers, basically. So small business owners would go out of business, potentially. Larger businesses would move overseas. That could leave us in some sort of recession or depression because the jobs would be moving out of the United States. It could have a cascade failure. So how would you take care of that if businesses start moving out because of this tax consequence?
You have 1 minute to respond.
That's part of that. So certainly, I feel large U.S. corporations can take some of the brunt of this as a value-added tax. I think a lot of people know that like Amazon paid zero income tax corporate income tax last year. There's a lot of tax loopholes that can be exploited by big business to essentially not pay their fair share. And what Yang is proposing is a value-added tax, which makes generating revenue from those transactions a lot harder to skirt around.
And also, those companies can leave the U.S., but where would they go? Because virtually every other country in this world has a value-added tax, and it's actually higher than the one proposed by Andrew Yang. But then also, with regards to small businesses, we can copy the model in European countries where they are exempt from having to pay the value-added tax. So there's some protections in place that we can exempt small businesses from.
Thank you. Your time's up.
Can I comment real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, VAT is actually consumer pay. If you go to Europe, you pay this VAT, value-added tax, when you buy a Louis Vuitton purse, for example. And you get that, when you leave that country, you get that money back. So contrary to popular belief, the business don't actually pay the VAT, where Andrew Yang is proposing the money's going to come from. Actually, it comes from the consumer. So that's, he thinks, where the
it
money
is
comes from.
paid.
Right. And then
you can respond in closing.
Yeah, I agree with socialism. I mean, Greece tried it, Venezuela tried it. It is a form of socialism. It could be in form of education or free healthcare, but it is a baby step, like I mentioned earlier. And when you mentioned that the big business like Amazon paid zero in corporate taxes, but they created millions of jobs for enabling this employee to pay their income tax. So indirectly, they did contribute to the economy by paying taxes through this employment they created.
Thank you. Your time is up. We'll be having our next audience question. Please keep in mind to make your question a question and not so much a mini speech.
Hello, my name is Philip and I'm a freshman at Monte Vista. And so after this debate, so far, what I hear is that you guys are mainly targeting those that are of low income. So if that's true, wouldn't a universal-based income, because obviously $1,000 isn't going to be that much for those of the rich, so could we just have $1,000 for those below a certain rate, for example, those in the lower class, rather than giving also the $1,000 to those that are also like Jeff Bezos, for example?
That was not his plan.
So the question is, we should make, why is it universal basic income? We should just give the basic income to people who make under a certain amount of money. So, that makes a lot of sense intuitively, right? But, I think the first answer to that is, well, if you cap it at, say, $50,000 a year, you're going to suddenly see a lot more people saying, oh, I only make $49,000 a year, so that they can get that income, right? And then the second piece is that the universal part is the piece that makes it very easy to administer. This is a thought that I don't personally agree with, but some more conservative and libertarian supporters of universal basic income say that, well, the government is only good at sending checks to people every single month, right? For example, Social Security or giving tax refunds. So it's far easier for the government to administer just sending $1,000 a month to every citizen in the U.S. If they have to go and create another administration to track down people who make, under $50,000 a year, then that adds more of a load to the government. And so that's why universality is always better than means testing.
Thank you, Prosed. Keep in mind, please limit your speeches to 1 minute. All right, we'll be having a response from the con side if you are interested. Would you care to respond? No? Okay. We have our next question.
Hi, so in the first pro speech, you mentioned two examples of universal basic income in Finland and Canada. I was wondering what the outcome is and if they are still in place, and if they are not, why they aren't in place anymore.
So my understanding about the Finland experiment, it was predetermined to be 2 years. So like there was a definite end date. It's not like they abandoned it because it wasn't working. In my opinion, they actually flubbed up the design because they targeted specifically unemployed people to receive this, I forget what the amount, maybe $500 worth of money per month. But it showed that it had a huge positive impact on the mental health of people. Stress levels went down. They trusted people more. They trusted the government more. In the case of the Canadian experiment, it actually had a measurable decrease in the hospitalization rate. But yeah, why they ended is because they were kind of trial periods for a predetermined amount of time.
Thank you. Conside, would you like to respond?
I think you asked about Canada. I don't know much about Canada, but I think Alaska was mentioned earlier. So I did a little research on Alaska's UBI. So some facts is their UBI is less than $2,000 per year, but Alaska also has one of the highest unemployment rates in the whole country. And what's happened in Alaska, if you follow our local politics, as I mentioned earlier, is that every election you'll have politicians promising to raise the universal basic income there. And then when they succeed in doing so, they find they certainly have problems paying for it. Now, Alaska is a state, big land-wise, but it's only less than 1 million people. So just imagine the struggles they're having and trying to extrapolate that to the entire United States.
Thank you. We have our next question.
So this is for the con side. My name is Habib. So data is the oil of the 21st century. We have Facebook ads, Google ads making a lot of money off of user data. What is your solution that isn't UBI that would also help rectify these injustices that are happening from these companies users' data?
So is your question asking us, who is against UBI, that the company is profiting of us, of our privacy information? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Should they, I think, actually, you just came up with a great idea. I think they should pay us $1,000 a month for our information. Why not?
That's for UBI.
If they want us, right?
That's UBI.
Facebook should pay us, not government. Yeah.
The point is something should happen.
Facebook should pay us.
You're asking a question. So you're asking a question that's on a lot of people's minds. Very important, but I don't see a connection to UBI personally, but it's an important question.
Thank you. Pro side, you have 1 minute to respond if you choose. You too, respond to that.
Yeah, I had a similar question, and data is one example, but basically, all the stats I kind of mentioned earlier about how wealth inequality is becoming an increasing problem in this country. I'd like to know an alternate solution to address this that's better than UBI. That's my question. I don't know if you can ask a question. No, sorry, not just that, but more of just the growing wealth inequality in the United States. What is a better solution than a UBI?
You will get to answer that question in your closing speech. Yeah. Do we have any more audience questions? Come up again.
I feel like everyone else already touched up on the same issue that I was asking, but like Yang proposes, like points out a lot of problems, right? So like he points out that like we have a high level of poverty in the United States, like 93% of new jobs created since the recession are temporary. There's a lot of wealth inequality and it's only getting worse in the US. We have a lot of automation and we usually don't see like the Republican side bring up real like solutions to a lot of these problems. So I'm just wondering like from your perspective, is there a way to solve these problems that doesn't involve the UBI?
So you'll get a minute to respond.
Okay, to address poverty, we have welfare program. And in Yang's program, that if you get more than $1,000 a month, which a lot of people are already getting $1,000 a month, because you can't survive on $1,000 a month, you don't get the UBI. Am I correct?
It depends on the individual. You can opt into it. If you want to forego your welfare benefits and opt into it, you can.
But the UBI is more like, if you don't make $1,000 in welfare, they will cap it at 1,000. That's my understanding. No?
Please no response from the pro side. You will get
Anyway.
1 minute to respond.
But my question is, well, his question was, how is Republican trying to solve the poverty problem? Yes, we are. We have welfare program. Do we income equality? We have the record stock market after since President Trump has been in office, a massive tax decrease, which is also putting more money in your pocket. And to address automation, I think Nolan said it best earlier.
Yeah, you can finish your sentence.
Okay. Yeah, when the budget went out of business and car took over, did it have UBI then? No.
Thank you. Pro side, you will have a minute to respond.
Comment. You're correct in saying like we're at record high GDPs, the stock market is booming, it's all-time high. But the problem is that like those gains aren't really being realized by majority of the population. I think like, not that many people are invested in the stock market. It's a smaller minority. Yeah. Is it 20%?
You
I know
one case indirectly.
No response from the concept,
Yeah.
please.
So yeah, like it is true we are a wealthy nation. Companies are doing really well, but that money is not trickling down in any meaningful way that affects like the vast majority of Americans' lives.
Thank you, pro side. I have another question.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. We tend to talk about these welfare programs in the abstract, and I'm just curious if those on stage have directly had any, either you or your family members or folks that you know, have had interaction with the welfare state. And I would actually pose this question to everybody in this room. It seems to me unlikely that probably most, if not everybody in this room, has even had any interaction with the welfare state. And so we tend to cast these aspersions in the abstract about what the welfare state does and doesn't do. But I'm just curious, do you have any real life first-hand experience with the welfare state and any supposed inefficiencies with that welfare state?
Thank you. Pro side, you will have a minute to respond.
So I don't have personal experience with the welfare state. I did ask one of my closest friends about her opinions about the UBI versus the welfare state because she did grow up on welfare. Her family took in SNAP benefits, but even then, her benefits a month would range from $83 to like $125 a month, and that's not enough, for a family, for an individual to survive with regards to grocery bills, much less a whole family. And that statistic and her anecdotal messaging there kind of matches the statistics. If you dive into it for welfare programs, not only are a lot of people who should be getting the benefits not receiving it, but the people who do receive benefits maybe only get on average of, say, $200 worth of the welfare benefits. So in a world where, where you would choose $1,000 a month or pick your cash-like programs where you average $200, you get plus $800 a month.
Thank you. Con side, would you like a minute to respond? Do you have one more question?
Can I make a statement?
After the debate, yes.
No, before the debate. Okay, I just want to make 3 points. Fox News, Tucker Carlson, you mentioned that when he interviewed Andrew Yang, he said, I like the concept of a UBI it's too bad that you're a Democrat. I wish you were a Republican. That's what Tucker is saying. And CNN, Anderson Cooper, saying that when he interviewed on the, I think the third debate of Andrew Yang, he said that you're talking about training. We've been training in the United States for the last 40 years. The policy that 40 years have been training for the layoff people, unemployable employees to be trained. But they end up in what? They went back to their original.
So I would strongly discourage anyone in the future from doing that at a debate. That is not similar to this. All right, so now we will have closing statements, 2 minutes per person. No more interruptions, please. And we'll have the con side go first and the pro side started. So we'll have our first con speaker. You have 2 minutes, and you will be strictly timed.
So, when my parents immigrated to the United States over 50 years ago, they came from a country which, at the time, was ruled by a dictator. They came to this country not for free income, but for freedom. Like millions of immigrants, they came for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But by defining what a basic income is for everybody, UBI would reverse what a lot of people think of this country, a country of free markets, free enterprise, and a country where we acknowledge that every individual is unique and should be able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness on their own terms. So, in short, UBI will not solve the problem of automation. It will not turn a truck driver into a computer programmer. It will not support a family here in the Bay Area or in most parts of the country. What it will do is create a massive new entitlement program which politicians will be pressured to raise every year, putting more pressure on our national debt and reducing incentives to work, and not to mention a person's self-respect. Yes, there are individuals who will struggle when their lives are disrupted by technology, but again, we should find ways to help them without giving an even same-size-fits-all handout to everybody, especially to the millionaires and billionaires who've profited from automation. So, in closing, I'd like to just thank YAPA again for hosting this debate. I don't know if many minds were changed, but I hope at the very least everybody just leaves thinking, asking themselves, what kind of government do we want and what kind of society do we want as these changes in technology are happening, both for today and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now have our first pro speaker.
So in closing, I'd like to, some of this is a review of a few of the startling statistics we mentioned earlier and some trends that 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and 60% can't afford a $500 expense. We also didn't talk about new job growth. In the last 15 years, 94% of the new jobs created were either temporary or contract. So we are indeed living in the gig economy, and these jobs typically don't provide traditional benefits such as healthcare. I think we all know that the cost of education is getting higher and higher in this country. Since 1989, the cost has basically ballooned 200%, while the median wages have stagnated. There's a popular graph from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which plots the GDP and median wages next to each other. And since like the 1940s, the two have been closely linked, right? Like as GDP goes up, the wages tend to rise. Only if you look at the graph, around 1975, GDP takes off, splits off, goes up, and the median wages have just kind of plateaued. Why is this? I mean, simply put, I think we all know that companies these days can just simply do more with less people due to software and automation. And this is only the beginning. We really haven't seen anything yet. AI is coming, self-driving technology is coming. We are indeed in unique, unprecedented times, and something big has to be done to address this growing inequality. A recent Oxford study estimated that around 50% of jobs are vulnerable to automation. But in the end, perhaps all this doesn't matter what we're talking about on the stage tonight. We may very well be forced one day to implement such a policy as technology continues to devalue human labor. In closing, I ask, what do we stand to lose by implementing a UBI too early? And what do we stand to lose by implementing it too late? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be having our final speaker from Con-Side.
I'm an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 14 years old. My parents came to this country fleeing from a big government, the government who decides that their thoughts are too dangerous. And that's the reason we come to America, for the freedom and liberty here. And I want to warn everyone in this room here the danger of socialism. It doesn't matter if it's a form of UBI or free medical health care for all, or even free university education. Those are the things that will enable or disable a lot of people that want to work hard. The danger of socialism is real. It happened to many, many countries: North Korea, Venezuela, China 70 years ago. Again, they are doing fine now because they adopted some form of capitalism. Now, talking about technology disrupting our lives, I was rear-ended just 2 months ago on 101 with a brand new car. I don't know what they're doing, so I feel that yes, people shouldn't be driving sometimes. However, that disruption, it would only increase more productivity and also job opportunity for a lot of engineers and to solve that problem that we cannot overcome sometime. Again, I think people shouldn't be driving sometime. However, I really believe that not having UBI altogether, but fix our current welfare program that we have, will solve a lot of problems that UBI is trying to solve. Because again, UBI, what they're trying to do is take out the entire program by implementing a system that may or may not work.
Thank you. We'll be having our final pro speaker.
Thank you. So I too am an immigrant, and my family and I came here to this country for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I wanted to take some time to address my opponent's fear of socialism as it relates to UBI, and posit UBI as a path forward for a capitalist system that doesn't start at zero. So I think first of all I wanted to point out that UBI in the 60s and 70s was actually a very popular policy. So among the general population, it had a favorable rating, and was in fact it was popularized by Milton Friedman, the classical, very conservative economist. He proposed a negative income tax, which is a sister sibling to the UBI. And in fact, UBI was passed twice in the House under Richard Nixon. His administration pushed this through. It was passed twice, but lost in the Senate because Democrats thought that the UBI was too low, and there were some Republicans who thought that the UBI was too high. And so ever since then, the UBI has never regained its popularity until now, and it's much needed now because of our economic transformation and automation. I also wanted to say that recently, George Mankey, he's a Harvard economist and was the economic advisor to George W. Bush. He has come out in favor of a UBI and VAT proposal, which is exactly what we've been arguing here. And I don't think that George Mankey is a socialist, and I don't think he would make this country go towards socialism. So in fact, I think that the way to think about this is that as automation continues to leave more people unemployed, we need to restructure our society so that the GDP gains, as seen by the whole economy, is actually redistributed down to all of us, and create a trickle-up economy so that we can all actually pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Now we'll be having our final round of voting. Keep in mind, the outcome of this debate will be decided by what percentage of people shift their opinion, either from yes to no, no to yes, undecided to yes, or undecided to no. So the second and final link is here. You will have 3 minutes to vote. Once the voting period is closed, we will announce the results. Side adding at 63% of the votes, which represents a 9.67% shift, positive shift in the amount of people that voted for them. And the con side gaining 6.5% to end at 33.3% of the votes. And the undecided side losing 16% and ending with 4% of the vote. The winner of this debate is the pro side.